Oh, the things we talk about before we record. This is Chris Cebollero, and we are back again with another great edition of the Inside EMS podcast. And I couldn't do it without the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour. Ladies know he's the man with the power. Kelly Grayson, KG. What's going on? How you doing?
I'm tired. I'm overworked. It's not really overworked. It's just that it seems for the last couple of weeks, every long distance transport I've been on has ended uh, 2 or 3 hours after the shift was supposed to end. So it's just nature of the beast.
But knowing you as well as I do, I would say that the stress is added by the frustration you feel when it happens.
Yeah, probably so. Probably so.
I think you compound that. And again, that's just the woosah inside that you have to be like, it's just part of the job, man. It's just part of the
Yeah.
job.
Well, that's what I keep telling myself.
As long as the checks keep clearing. That's right.
That's right. That's right. It's just part of the job. Just part of the job. This is. I love my
Kelly,
job. I love my job.
yeah. I think one of the things that we do well is we tell a lot of stories and we share a lot of experiences. When we talk about a topic, we are really getting into things that we've seen, things that we've failed at,
Mhm.
things that we made mistakes at. And a lot of times that's based in story, right? And one of the things that I don't think we do well enough is every time we're in class, we've gotten into a habit in the old days of killing those classes with stories.
War
And
stories. Yeah.
then came the unspoken culture, or maybe the spoken culture of stop the war stories in classes. And I think that that's been a mistake over the years as we've now gained experiences. I live on the premise. There's a great motivational speaker. His name is Les Brown, and he uses the quote that says, "Never tell a story without a point, never make a point without a story." And I think
Yeah.
that when it comes to the art of storytelling and why storytelling matters in EMS, we talk a lot about skills and protocols and
Yeah.
response times, but there's something else that defines our profession, and something that doesn't show up on a report, and that's storytelling. The
Yeah.
stories we tell, they shape how we learn, they shape how we lead, they shape how the public sees us. And I think today we're going to spend a little bit of time of talking about why storytelling matters in EMS.
Yeah, and I'm eager to do this because as you know, I'm somewhat of a well-known EMS storyteller. That's kind of what I do. And you're right, the pendulum swings back and forth from we went from class about war stories, and that's not effective, to war stories are a bad thing, and I think that's too far of a swing of the pendulum. I think just like your Les Brown quote, never tell a story without a point, never make a point without a story. I think real world experience, and here's the thing, you know what I say about experience, and this is where you go wrong with telling nothing but war stories. If they're not educational and they don't illustrate your point, they're kind of harmful. So these stories have a purpose to them. My demeanor in class and my demeanor in patients with patients has a purpose to it. And these stories just are not just entertainment. They're how we pass down lessons. They connect with our crews, explain to city leaders what it is we do and why this job matters. And the right story can stick longer than any statistic. Nancy uses the quote of she puts the need for funding in terms of a gallon of milk, and
Yeah.
makes something to relatable to the people that don't really understand our profession. That could be from city leaders to brand new students. What's it going to cost to fund the ambulance? A gallon of milk per week per household. That
Yeah.
sort of thing, and
Yeah.
and puts it down to something they can understand.
And that's a great analogy, right? I mean, she made it really simple when we think
Yeah.
about it. I don't know that we talk about, you talk about a gallon of milk. How many Starbucks coffees is that, right? So,
Yeah.
what do we need to give up to get something else? I think is important, but I think when we think about the power, I mean, facts fade, stories stick. I can quote you response times all day, but what people remember is the story of, a grandmother who walked out of a hospital after arrest and she sees you coming in, and she grabs your hand and you don't even
Yeah.
remember who she is, right?
Yep.
But I'd love to know if you have a favorite story that you tell. But and I think I have one as well. But I'll give you mine just so we can start off of how
Okay.
powerful storytelling is. And I'd love to hear yours before we get back into the swing. So I was called to a rehab hospital for a woman that had a stroke. She came in and she had knee surgery, and she was being rehabbed for knee surgery. I get there, the doctor's in the room. There's an IV started, and she goes, "Oh," he's like, "Oh my gosh, it's a tragic story. She came in for knee rehab. Now she has a stroke." I go over to her. She's got facial drooping. She's drooling. Nobody's wiping drool from her face. And the hospital that we're going to is about 4 blocks away. Put her on the stretcher, take her to the hospital, and give my report, and I leave. A couple hours later, I go back, and I am not a paramedic, Kelly, who goes to the nurse and says, "How's that patient doing?"
Yeah,
When I get to the hospital, my job is done when I close the doors, when I put the stretcher back in. But this case, I said, "How's our patient doing?" And she goes, "Well, go look." I went in the back where she was, where I put her, and she's sitting up in bed, eating breakfast, watching The Price is Right.
that is awesome.
What had
That's
happened,
awesome.
what happened was they had given her the insulin that was meant for the woman in the next bed. I
Ooh.
never checked her blood sugar. And it was the doctor who made me believe that she was having a stroke. This is a doctor. I didn't go through my normal assessment. I put her on a cardiac monitor. I took her vital signs, but because she had an IV, I never checked her blood sugar. And she had a blood sugar when she came in of 17 or 27, something
Ooh.
like that. And it was my failure. And it was
Yeah.
my complacency, and it was my
Yep.
tunnel vision. Now, I've told that story the same way since it happened 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's a powerful story in the fact of it was my failure that didn't take care of this woman. So then I used that to talk about tunnel vision and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. So
The burned hand teaches best.
yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure I believe that in every instance, and we try to teach enough in class there the hand doesn't get burned. They learn those lessons in class where they don't kill anybody.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm famous for my ostrich attack story, and that's entertaining.
yeah,
And that's one of the things I do to tell you to impress upon people that um, even in really bad situation and among death, you can find something to lift you up. But for me, the story I tell to illustrate what we can get out of every call, the human connection out of every call. I used to have a frequent flyer, as my old boss would say, a valued repeat customer, the foundation of every successful business. Um, and the crews cordially hated going to his house and hated his wife because she was we called her the dragon lady, and she would complain and fuss and the first time I met her, I realized that this is a woman who has been married to a man for 40 plus years, and now he's dying, and she has no idea how to process it. So I do my normal thing, and I joke around with him, and I crack a joke and make her smile despite herself, and get to know her that way. And for 2 weeks, transporting her husband back and forth to radiation treatments, I got to know him pretty well. And toward the end, right before Sanford died, um, he said, "This has got to be not what you expected when you went into EMS." I said, "It's all right. It's what we do. This is part of the job." He said, "Well," I said, "the real job is not heroism every day. You're not snatching the life from the jaws of death. It's calls like this. You take what you can from them." And he said, "Well, you're my hero." And I said, "No, I've done nothing heroic." And he said, I get choked up about this every time. He said, "You make my wife smile. And do you know how long it's been since I've seen her smile?"
yeah,
And that point illustrates that what is going to touch a patient is something that we may not appreciate. And it may not be any life-saving skill of yours, but it's kindness.
yeah,
And that struck me, and I've kind of changed the way I look at my job because of it.
yeah. But
Um, and these stories, um, the neuroscience backs it.
yeah,
If you can establish some relevance and some point to your story, it will stick better. Stories light up, um, light up more of the brain than facts. And there are more neural connection. And EMS stories are part of our culture, and they
Right.
teach us who we are and what we value as a profession.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I've heard you tell that story before, and you tell it the same way, and you get choked up at the same points,
Yes, I
So,
do.
but it's really interesting
It was
because,
powerful for me.
but it's not only for you, it's as you're telling that, where you're thinking what I'm doing is benign, you're really changing people's lives, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
when I mentor new leaders, Kelly, I don't just teach them how to do to-do lists and don'ts. And, I tell them all the time, what I got wrong and what I learned from that. And in my first book, Ultimate Leadership, 10 Rules for Success, those were the rules that I had to develop to become a good leader. I was a horrible leader. I've talked about that on this show.
Yeah.
Rule number one is never allow your emotions to dictate your actions. I've got a story of how I learned that rule, and I share those things. And, when you've said it earlier before we started, we were talking about instructors and how they'll stand in front of the room and they'll just read PowerPoints. When you stand in front of people, it really is. And one of the things that I try to do is I try to bring the relatable, the story into my instruction. I hardly ever
Mm-hmm.
turn around to look at the PowerPoint. I use the PowerPoints really in my mind as placeholders for time. And I
Yeah.
know that
They're my
where I
lecture
am,
notes.
yeah, where I am in the PowerPoint, I know exactly
Yeah.
where I should be in the presentation. And but I do think we have to teach people the art of storytelling. And we're going to have some tips coming up here a little bit in the show. But I just do think that we have to be able to teach storytelling, understand it with don't tell a story without a point, don't make a point without a story, and then see if we can corral people into storytelling.
Yeah, and the FTOs in the field do the same thing. They establish the relevance of what the students learned in class, and a good FTO can show how that knowledge is applied and why it matters. And a bad FTO is horrible if all they do is discount and denigrate what was learned in class. But when a rookie hears a real story of how the protocol played out on the street, that's when it sticks. And these stories, also help ease the fear that they may feel, and the fear of the responsibility they now have. These rookies realize that they're not alone in making mistakes,
Yeah.
and that the mistakes won't. You can learn from the mistakes, and they can make you a better medic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there are two things that we need to be able to look at as well. So when we tell stories, I can count, and probably you know this as well as I do, the number of people outside of EMS who will say to me, "What's the worst call that you've ever seen? What's the worst thing that you've ever seen?" And
The paycheck.
I use an old Greg Freeze comment because he has the best response to that, and he says, "The day they put pineapple on pizza." Now, I will eat pineapple on pizza, so I don't know if it's the worst thing, but when I heard him say that, because I'm like, how do you get out of that? What do you share with people who aren't in EMS? The gross things that you've seen. But, good leaders, we have to think about that there's two areas that we have to be able to think about how storytelling helps us. And that's in leadership and culture. And a lot of the things that I do as a leader is based on the things that I've liked from leaders, the things that I've despised from leaders. There are things that I do that I don't like. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that I'm doing inside my organization right now is I'm trying to determine why the supervisors are so busy. So I'm having them write a task log of I did this from this time to this. And I hate that freaking exercise. I hate that exercise as a passion when I had to do it. But the value of it is that I don't understand where their time is going or how to help them mitigate and get back to,
Yeah.
get back to their normal. And I told them, I said, now I want you to know, I hate this exercise. When I've had to do it, I just can't stand it, but this is why we're doing it. And I think it just kind of really helps. So think about it. When you tell a story of what happened, when we didn't double check our med, or when we didn't check the blood glucose, or when we didn't, I remember one time I almost grabbed atropine and lidocaine and I grabbed the wrong box and I opened it and my partner said, "Are you giving that?" And I looked at it, I'm like, "No, I'm not." You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
but we have to think about how do we put storytelling into our leadership of the organization to make it part of the culture.
Yeah. Well, and culture is built around those stories. Every agency has those legendary calls or that those medics everyone remembers, and that is those build the culture of the agency. If you have an agency with a toxic culture, you got to reinforce those standards you were talking about and build new stories and a new culture. Leaders can either let those stories define the culture, or use new ones like you said, to change the culture around and point people toward what matters most.
Right. And really, that comes to be a patient. All right, Kelly, we kind of teased it as we get up there in time. There are 8 practical tips on how to be a better storyteller. I'll give them one, and then you take the second one, and we'll go down the list. But it's what I started with first. You have to be able to make a point. Oh my goodness, pardon me. One of the things that I did when I was driving to Kentucky a couple of weeks back is I was doing a class on habit. And I was trying to understand how the environment affects the habit, the behavior to happen. And I couldn't come up with something. I couldn't come up with something. I told a story in the class, and I hate driving. I despise driving. It's like being
Amen, brother.
it's like being in prison without the personal relationship, right? I mean, so that's what driving is like to me. And one of the things that I realized is I had taken Copenhagen long cut. I put it in my mouth. And I said to myself, God, I hate this stuff. I don't know why I do it. But the reason I did it was every time I'm on a long distance drive, the habit is, the environment is, it makes me want to dip because that's where I learned how to do it. And I bought it. So I stopped at the convenience store. I bought it. I had it in my car. I opened it and I used it before I realized I had it in my mouth. And now I went through all the steps. I bought it. I looked at the date, all the stuff you're right. But that's how the environment made that habit happen. So now when we think about telling a story, and I talked about Les Brown's quote, never tell a story without a point, never make a point without a story. You have to be able to relate it to something that somebody else can connect to it.
Yeah, yeah, and those things will make it stick. You can also get too involved with it. So point number 2 is you keep it simple and focused. Highlight the people and the turning points, the things that made the difference in the story and what you learned from it. You can go on and ramble on and you lose people, but if you keep it simple and focused, and for me, EMS has become about the relationships, and the relationships with patients, the relationships with our partners and coworkers. Focus on that, and they'll stay with you, and you'll make a great point.
Yeah, good one. Number 3 is be authentic. And remember, one of the things that I think by our training we have no choice but to be a little egotistical. And I think that sets us up for failure until we finally realized how humble we need to be in this job. And it's not about egotism. It's about the people that we're making their wife laugh, right? So you have to be able to be authentic, share your wins, talk about your mistakes. And that's one of the things I'll talk about all the time is my failures, because pardon me, my failures were my biggest lessons. And but when you show the human side of who you are and you kind of bare your soul, it makes you a better provider. And it wasn't until you realize that your mistakes and failures shape who you are as a provider that you realize that we were sold a bag of goods based on the fact that mistakes are bad and failure is bad. Name the one thing you ever did the first time you did great, right? So be authentic and be a little vulnerable.
Yep, those, and boy, you have no idea how much that matters to the listeners of your story. I know I've done it right when the parts I get choked up in a story, the people I'm talking to are getting choked up as well. And when I can get through telling that story, or as I'm doing it, people in the audience are elbowing each other and pointing. It's like, yeah, he's done that. Or that happened to you, or they cry while I'm crying. That's when it had some resonance with them. The other thing you can do is describe things too much. That's a wrong thing. Don't describe things too much. Use these sensory details sparingly, because the imagination is probably better at conveying that than your description.
That's a good point. Yep.
Just enough for people to picture it, but don't pound on it.
Yeah. So number five is pace yourself and pause for effect. And I don't
Yeah.
know, Kelly, I do this a lot when I talk, is I'm a very animated speaker. It's to me, it's a performance. And
Some might say manic.
and I will pause when I try to make a point. And one of the big things about this, and just kind of let it hang in
Yeah.
the air. But I think when you're telling stories, you have to be able just to find the natural pause. And that's really where you're kind of taking a breath and thinking about it and just stopping. And that's where we kind of put those vocalized pauses in there, ums and the ahs, and feel free just to pause and be quiet.
Yeah.
Pace the story. There are sometimes that people tell stories so slow, and you're like, oh my God, stick me in the eye. Other people tell stories too fast, and my brain's trying to catch up to what they're trying to say, and I'm a
Yeah.
couple sentences back before we figure it out. So I think that's a big part of telling a good story.
Yeah, and that's one of the hardest things to do is to overcome the urge to fill that pause with a filler. Another thing that works effectively for me besides the pause is to lower my voice and whisper.
Yeah,
Instead of shout, if you really want somebody to listen closely, lower your voice a little bit. They can still hear, but they have to lean
lean
forward
in.
and lean
Yeah,
into
yeah,
it a little bit. And you got to connect it back. You got to the comedians call this a callback. You always tie it to this bigger idea. Come back to the original point you were making. You got to connect it back to really cement that story and that lesson in their brain.
yeah. I think that's a good one. And then number seven, just two more left, is invite other stories. So one of the things that I did as part of this, and we talked about it in our show prep, was I'm going to tell a story that exactly the story I told at the top of the hour, and then I'm going to go to you, Kelly, and say, tell me the story that you.
Yeah.
So, but you're able to do that, and a lot of times when you start these stories, has anyone ever dealt with abuse in the field? What was that all about? Or give me the best call that you've ever run in your career. How about you? And I think we have to be able to get people to be part of that. And I think what that does too is it creates unity, it creates teamwork, it creates a
Yeah.
sense of ownership into being part of the team. And that's one of the things I don't think we do well enough. We hire people into EMS and they feel like outsiders into the organization that we invited them into. So we need to be able to keep them being part of the team. And sometimes they got to tell their stories as well.
Yep. Sharing builds community. The other thing, if you're not a natural, you have to practice. You have to kind of, if speaking to others and regaling others with your tales is not something natural for you, uh, you can make it seem natural by practicing enough. Refine it over time. Use the meetings, trainings, podcasts, those things to refine those stories until you can get them down to the point you need to make and keep people's attention.
Agreed. So here's a story for you. I was doing this podcast called Inside EMS with Kelly Grayson, and he never went to the close on time. So I don't know, Kelly, but let's go to close.
Uh, Yeah, we've talked about how stories shape what we learn, what we do. We'd love to hear what kind of stories you had that change your career, change your perception of what it is that we do. I'd love for you to share those on the show at ems1.com. Maybe Chris or I will talk about them or invite you on to share that story with
Yeah.
us. But that's it for this week. For myself and co-host Chris Cebollero, thanks for tuning in to Inside EMS. We'll catch y'all next week.